The sun was setting behind the hills as Elena wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a small streak of grease above her eyebrow. The old fan in the corner of her garage spun lazily, barely moving the hot summer air. Most shops in town had closed for the day, but Elena couldn't afford to turn away work, even if it meant staying late. Just a little more, she whispered to herself, as she tightened a bolt under the hood of Mrs. Rodriguez's ancient pickup truck. The engine had been giving the elderly woman trouble for months, but Elena had finally tracked down the problem, a cracked fuel line that most of the fancy garages in town had missed. Elena's small repair shop sat on the edge of Pine Creek, a town that had seen better days. Her father had opened Reyes Auto Repair 30 years ago, and the faded sign still hung above the entrance, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. When he died 3 years back, Elena had taken over, determined to keep his dream alive despite the big chain auto shops that had sprung up downtown. The bell above the door jingled as Mrs. Rodriguez shuffled in, her silver hair tucked neatly under a floral scarf. "Is my baby ready yet, dear?" she asked, peering through thick glasses at her truck. Elena smiled, wiping her hands on the rag tucked into her belt. "Almost done, Mrs. R. I found the problem. Your fuel line was cracked. Those guys at Super Auto missed it completely. That's why I come to you, honey. Those fancy places, they just want to sell you parts you don't need. Your daddy taught you right." The old woman's eyes crinkled with affection. Elena nodded, feeling the familiar pang whenever someone mentioned her father. "Let me finish up. 10 more minutes and you'll be good to go." As Elena worked, she couldn't help worrying about the stack of bills waiting on her desk, the mortgage on the garage, the parts she had to order, the electricity bill marked "Final Notice." The shop was barely staying afloat. She had let her only employee go last month, a hard decision that still kept her up at night. Once Mrs. Rodriguez had driven away, her truck purring better than it had in years, Elena locked up the front door and retreated to the small office, in the back. The room was simple, a metal desk covered with paperwork, a worn leather chair her father had refused to replace, and walls lined with photographs and certificates. Her favorite was a faded picture of her at 10 years old, standing proudly next to her father as she held up a timing belt she had replaced all by herself. Elena sighed as she sorted through the bills. At this rate, she'd be lucky to keep the garage open another 6 months. She had already refinanced twice, and the bank had made it clear there wouldn't be a third time. She was about to turn off the lights when she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside, followed by a desperate honking. Elena glanced at her watch, nearly 8 p.m., and considered pretending she wasn't there. But that wasn't how her father had taught her to run a business. Flicking the lights back on, she headed to the front. Through the window, she could see a sleek black Mercedes with its hood up, steam billowing into the twilight air. A tall man in an expensive suit paced beside it, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing with frustration. Elena unlocked the door and stepped outside. "Can I help you?" The man turned, surprise flickering across his face. He was older than she had first thought, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp blue eyes. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in a month. "You're open?" Relief washed over his features. "My car just died on me. I was on my way to an important meeting when it started overheating." He ran a hand through his hair, which only made it look more expensive somehow. "Every other place is closed." Elena approached the Mercedes cautiously. Cars like this usually went to the dealership, not her small-town garage. "I can take a look, but parts for this model might be hard to get tonight. I'd appreciate anything you can do. I'm James, by the way." He extended his hand. "Elena Reyes." Her calloused palm met his smooth one. "This is my shop." James nodded, glancing at the worn building behind her. If he had any thoughts about its appearance, he kept them to himself. "Do you mind if I wait? Inside? I need to make some calls." Elena led him in, suddenly aware of the shabby waiting area, with its mismatched chairs and ancient coffee machine. "Help yourself to coffee. It's not great, but it's hot." While James made his calls in hushed, urgent tones, Elena popped the hood of the Mercedes and began her inspection. Despite its fancy exterior, An engine was an engine. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking hoses, belts, and fluid levels. It didn't take long to find the problem: a broken water pump belt and a radiator leak. On a normal car, it would be a straightforward fix. On a Mercedes like this, it could get complicated. She returned to the waiting area where James was still on his phone, now speaking in what sounded like fluent Japanese. When he saw her, he quickly ended the call. "Found your problem," Elena said, wiping her hands on her already stained work pants. "Your water pump belt snapped, and there's a small crack in your radiator. The good news is, I can fix the belt tonight. The bad news is that radiator needs to be replaced, and I don't have the part for a car like yours." James frowned. How long would it take to get the part? 2 days, maybe 3. Elena shrugged apologetically. "But I can do a temporary fix on the radiator that will get you to the nearest dealership in the city. It's about an hour's drive from here." She expected him to be annoyed, maybe even demand she do better, as customers with expensive cars often did. Instead, he looked thoughtful. "Can I watch you work?" he asked. The request surprised her. "Sure, if you want to. Most people prefer to wait out front." "I'm curious," he said simply. As Elena gathered her tools and headed back to the Mercedes, James followed, removing his suit jacket and draping it carefully over a chair. She became aware of how different they must look. She in her oil-stained work clothes, he in his tailored shirt with gold cufflinks that caught the light. Elena set to work, narrating what she was doing more out of nervousness than anything else. "This model has the belt tucked way in the back, which makes it tricky," she explained, reaching deep into the engine compartment. "Most mechanics would tell you the whole engine needs to come out to replace it, but there's a shortcut if you know where to look." To her surprise, James asked intelligent questions. He wasn't just being polite, he genuinely wanted to understand. As she worked, Elena found herself relaxing, the familiar rhythm of fixing an engine taking over. She used a special tool her father had made years ago, a curved wrench designed specifically for hard-to-reach belts. "My dad made this," she told James proudly. "He could fix anything with an engine." "He taught you well," James observed, watching as she maneuvered the tool with practiced ease. "Everything I know came from him." Elena smiled, remembering long evenings spent in this very garage, her father patiently explaining how each part worked together. He believed in fixing things right the first time. The temporary radiator repair was trickier, requiring a special sealant and a careful touch. As Elena applied it, she explained, "This will hold for about 100 miles, enough to get you where you need to go, but don't push it beyond that." Throughout the repair, James received several more calls but let them go to voicemail. Instead, he watched Elena work with undisguised interest. There was something almost childlike in his curiosity, at odds with his otherwise polished appearance. After nearly an hour, Elena closed the hood with satisfaction. "That should do it. Let's start her up and see." The engine turned over smoothly, purring with a rich sound that only expensive cars seem to make. Elena watched the temperature gauge carefully, but it held steady. "Looks good. Just remember, this is temporary. Get that radiator replaced as soon as possible." Back inside, Elena calculated the bill, hesitating slightly. The parts weren't expensive, but she'd spent over an hour on the repair. Still, she quoted a fair price, resisting the temptation to charge extra, just because the car was worth more than her entire garage. James didn't even glance at the total. He simply handed over a credit card that looked like it was made of actual metal. "You're very good at what you do," he said as Elena ran the card through her ancient card reader. "Just doing my job," she replied, suddenly self-conscious. As she handed him his receipt, James reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple but elegant, with just a name and phone number embossed in silver. "If you ever need anything, call this number directly, day or night." Elena took the card automatically, glancing at it briefly before tucking it into her pocket. The name simply read, James Harrington, with no company or title. The gesture seemed kind, but ultimately meaningless, the sort of thing wealthy people did to feel generous without any real commitment. "Thanks for the help, Elena," James said, sliding back into his Mercedes. "You saved me tonight." She watched as the expensive car pulled away, its taillights disappearing down the dark road. Another day done, another car fixed. Elena locked up the garage and trudged to her small apartment above the shop, the business card forgotten in her pocket. She had no way of knowing that by this time tomorrow, her life would change forever. Elena woke before her alarm the next morning, her mind already running through the day's appointments. The spring in her bed had been poking her back for months, but a new mattress was far down on her list of priorities. Through the small window of her apartment, she could see the first light of dawn breaking over the hills. Another day, another, $1, hopefully enough dollars to keep the lights on. She shuffled to her tiny kitchen and started the coffee maker, the same one her father had used for years. While it gurgled and hissed, she turned on the local news more out of habit than interest. And in business news, the too cheerful morning anchor was saying, "Tech billionaire James Harrington made a surprise appearance in our state yesterday." The CEO of Harrington Industries was spotted in the Capitol, reportedly meeting with state officials about a potential new manufacturing facility that could bring hundreds of jobs to the region. Elena nearly dropped her coffee mug. James Harrington? She fumbled in her pocket for the business card from last night, which she'd forgotten to take out. There it was, simple, elegant, with just a name and phone number. James Harrington. Thiuwang, man whose broken-down Mercedes she'd fixed, was one of the richest people in the country. The news showed a photo of him shaking hands with the governor, wearing the same suit he'd had on in her garage. No way, Elena whispered to herself. Why would a billionaire CEO let her fix his car instead of calling some premium roadside service? And why hadn't he mentioned who he was? She shook her head and tucked the card into her wallet. It didn't matter who he was. He'd needed help. She'd provided it. End of story. Rich people lived in a different world, one that briefly overlapped with hers for an hour last night before continuing on its separate path. After a quick shower, Elena headed down to open the garage. Tuesday mornings were usually slow, which would give her time to catch up on paperwork and order parts. She flipped the sign to open, turned on the lights, and settled at her desk with her second cup of coffee. The bell above the door jingled at exactly 8:30. Her first appointment, Tom Walker, bringing in his delivery van for its regular oil change. "Morning, Elena," Tom said, handing over his keys. "How's business?" "Can't complain," she lied, forcing a smile. Tom ran the local bakery and was one of her regular customers, but even he had mentioned that the new chain garage was offering discounts he found tempting. "Good to hear. Say, did you see the commotion downtown this morning? Some fancy-pants businessman flew in on a helicopter. The whole town's talking about it." Elena raised an eyebrow. "A helicopter? In Pine Creek?" "Landed right in the park. Mayor's out there rolling out the red carpet. Apparently it's some big shot looking to build a factory or something." A chill ran down Elena's spine. It couldn't be, could it? She pushed the thought away and focused on Tom's van. "I'll have this done in an hour," she promised. "Want me to check the brakes too? They were getting a bit soft last time." After Tom left, Elena worked steadily through the morning. Oil change for the van, brake pads for Mrs. Foster's sedan, a tricky carburetor rebuild for Old Man Jenkins' vintage truck. Each job was entered carefully in her worn ledger, each payment noted with a silent prayer of thanks. Around noon, just as she was washing up for lunch, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside. Elena watched through the window as the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall and polished in a way that seemed out of place in Pine Creek, wearing a tailored pantsuit and carrying a tablet. The woman strode purposefully into the garage, looking around with sharp, assessing eyes, before landing on Elena. "Elena Reyes?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. "That's me," Elena replied, suddenly conscious of the grease under her fingernails and the worn logo on her work shirt. "My name is Diane Chen, executive assistant to James Harrington." The woman extended her hand. "Mr. Harrington would like to speak with you." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "With me? Why?" Diane's expression remained neutral. "He didn't share the details with me. He simply asked me to bring you to him if you're available. She glanced at her watch. He has a brief window in his schedule right now. Elena looked around her garage. Tom's van was finished and her next appointment wasn't until 2 p.m. I guess I could spare an hour. Let me just close up. As Elena locked the door, questions tumbled through her mind. What could a billionaire possibly want with her? Was there something wrong with the repair she'd done? But the fix had been solid. She was sure of it. The SUV was luxurious inside, with leather seats so soft they felt like clouds. Diane drove in silence, navigating through town toward the small hotel that was Pine Creek's only claim to upscale accommodation. "So," Elena said, trying to break the awkward silence, "you work for Mr. Harrington?" "For 8 years now," Diane replied, her eyes on the road. "What's he like? As a boss, I mean." Diane paused, then said, "Demanding, brilliant, fair." She glanced at Elena, and very interested in people who impress him, which doesn't happen often. Before Elena could ask what that meant, they arrived at the Pine Creek Inn. A pair of serious-looking men in dark suits stood by the entrance, earpieces visible. They nodded respectfully to Diane as she led Elena through the lobby and into the elevator. The top floor of the hotel had been transformed. People with laptops and headsets moved purposefully between rooms, some speaking in hushed tones, others barking orders into phones. It looked like the command center of some military operation, rather than a small-town hotel. Diane led Elena to a suite at the end of the hall and knocked once before entering. The room beyond had been converted into an office, with screens displaying charts and maps on one wall. James Harrington stood by the window looking out over the town, his back to the door. "Mr. Harrington," Diane announced, "Elena Reyes is here." James turned and his serious expression melted into a warm smile. He was dressed more casually today, expensive jeans and a simple button-down shirt that probably cost more than Elena's. "Monthly rent. Elena, thank you for coming." He crossed the room and shook her hand. "I hope Diane didn't drag you away from anything urgent." "No, it's fine," Elena said, feeling strangely underdressed in her work clothes. "But I'm a little confused about why I'm here." James nodded to Diane, who quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. "Please sit." He gestured to a pair of armchairs by the window. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Water? I'm fine, thanks." Elena perched on the edge of the chair, her back straight. "Is there something wrong with your car? The fix I did should hold until you can get to a proper dealership." James chuckled. "The car is perfect. You did excellent work." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. Your repair was impressive." Elena shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It was a simple fix. For you, maybe. But I've had that car serviced at the most exclusive shops in the country, and none of them found the shortcut you did. You fixed in an hour what they would have charged me thousands and kept for days." "My dad taught me to look for the simplest solution first," Elena said, relaxing slightly. "Most problems aren't as complicated as people make them out to be." James smiled. "Exactly, that's exactly it." He stood suddenly and paced to the window. "Elena, do you know what I do?" "You're the CEO of Harrington Industries. I saw you on the news this morning." "Yes, but do you know what Harrington Industries does?" Elena thought back to what little she knew about the company. "Technology, right? Computers and stuff?" James laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Among other things. We started in computer hardware, but we've expanded. One of our newest divisions is focused on transportation technology, specifically creating more efficient engines." He turned back to face her. "For 6 months, I've been looking for someone with a particular talent, someone who understands engines intuitively, not just technically, someone who sees solutions others miss." Elena felt a flutter of unease. "And that's me? When my car broke down yesterday, it wasn't an accident. Well, the breakdown was, but I've been visiting small garages across 3 states, posing as a regular customer with car trouble, testing mechanics, watching how they work." The pieces clicked into place in Elena's mind. "You were testing me?" James nodded. And you passed with flying colors. Not just your technical skill, but your integrity. You didn't try to overcharge me or suggest unnecessary repairs, even though it was obvious I could afford it. Elena stood up, suddenly angry. So you were playing games? Pretending to need help to see if I'd cheat you? I prefer to think of it as thorough research, James said calmly. I need someone I can trust to lead my new engine research team, and credentials on paper only tell you so much. I wanted to see real skill in action. Elena's anger faltered, replaced by confusion. Lead your what? I'm just a small-town mechanic. You're much more than that, Elena. You have a gift. James walked to his desk and picked up a folder. I had my team look into your background after I left your garage. Top of your class at technical college. 3 patents for engine improvements that you never had the money to develop. A reputation for fixing problems other mechanics can't solve. He handed her the folder. Inside were copies of her school records, her patents, even testimonials from customers, including some who had traveled from neighboring states specifically to have her work on their vehicles. How did you get all this? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I have resources, James said simply. The point is, you're exactly the person I've been looking for. I want to offer you a job, Elena. Head of Mechanical Innovation at Harrington Industries' new transportation division, with a team of engineers at your disposal and the resources to develop your ideas. Elena's head spun. This had to be a joke. I don't have the qualifications for something like that. I don't even have a full engineering degree. Degrees can be earned. Natural talent like yours can't be taught. James's eyes were intense, focused entirely on her. The salary would be substantial, and part of the deal would be saving your father's garage, renovating it as a testing facility while preserving its character. Elena's breath caught. The garage? Saved? Why would you do that? Because sometimes innovation doesn't come from fancy labs or academic theories. Sometimes it comes from people who've spent their lives with their hands and engines, solving real problems. James smiled. Your father taught you well, Elena. Now you can share that knowledge on a bigger scale. Elena stared out the window at her small town, the garage barely visible in the distance. The offer was too good to be true. A dream job, financial security, saving her father's legacy. I need time to think, she managed to say. James nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course. Take the rest of the day. But tomorrow morning. He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. Well, let's just say you should be at your garage early. There's something I want to show you. As Diane drove her back to the garage, Elena clutched the folder in her hands, her mind racing with possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerous and fragile taking root in her heart. Hope. Elena barely slept that night. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with thoughts of James Harrington's offer. The folder he'd given her sat, open on her small kitchen table, its contents spread out like a map to a future she'd never imagined possible. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep altogether. She pulled on her father's old cardigan, worn at the elbows but still smelling faintly of motor oil and his aftershave, and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. What would you do, Dad? She whispered to the empty room. The framed photo of her father on the bookshelf seemed to smile back at her, offering no answers but somehow giving her comfort all the same. By the time dawn broke, Elena had made up her mind. She would hear James out, see what this mysterious something was that he wanted to show her. But she wouldn't commit to anything yet. Dreams were dangerous things. They could lift you up, but they could also blind you to reality. She showered and dressed with unusual care, settling on her newest pair of jeans and a clean blue work shirt with her name embroidered on the pocket. Her father had given her that shirt on her 30th birthday, telling her with pride that she was the future of Reyes Auto Repair. The future, Elena muttered to herself as she locked her apartment door. Whatever that might be. The street was eerily quiet as she walked the short distance to the garage. Usually there would be a few early risers heading to the diner for breakfast or farmers driving into town for supplies. Today, there was no one. As Elena rounded the corner to her garage, she stopped dead in her tracks. The empty lot next to her building, which had been nothing but dirt and weeds for as long as she could remember, had been transformed overnight. The ground had been cleared and leveled, with a large circular area marked out in bright white paint. "What on earth?" she breathed, hurrying forward. Mr. Rivera from the grocery store across the street was already outside, staring at the scene with undisguised curiosity. "Elena, do you know what's happening?" he called as she approached. "Some men were out here before dawn, measuring and marking. They wouldn't tell me anything." Elena shook her head, her heart pounding. "I'm not sure, Mr. Rivera." Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message from an unknown number. "Hope you're an early riser. Be there in 10 minutes. J.H." As Elena unlocked the garage door, she noticed other people beginning to gather on the street. Word spread quickly in a town the size of Pine Creek. By the time she turned on the lights and started a pot of coffee, a small crowd had formed outside, all eyes on the mysterious clearing next door. At precisely 7 a.m., the distant sound of whirring blades cut through the morning quiet. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as the sound approached, and people began pointing at the sky. Elena stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the rising sun. There, descending from the clouds, was a sleek black helicopter emblazoned with the Harrington Industries logo in silver. The wind from its blades kicked up dust and sent the onlookers scrambling back, holding on to hats and covering their faces. With remarkable precision, the helicopter settled in the center of the marked circle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the side door slid open and James Harrington stepped out, followed by Diane and 2 men carrying what looked like rolled-up blueprints. The crowd gasped and phones came out, snapping pictures and recording videos. James, seemingly oblivious to the attention, walked straight toward Elena, who stood frozen in the doorway of her garage. "Good morning," he said, as casually as if he'd arrived in a car rather than a helicopter. "I hope we're not too early." Elena found her voice. "What is all this?" James smiled, glancing back at the helicopter. "Transportation. The roads around here are charming but inefficient." He turned to the gathering crowd and raised his hand in greeting. "Good morning, everyone. I apologize for the dramatic entrance." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone called out, "Are you really James Harrington?" "Last time I checked," James replied with a good-natured laugh. The crowd responded with nervous chuckles. Mayor Wilson pushed his way to the front, already wearing his official sash despite the early hour. "Mr. Harrington, this is an unexpected honor. If we'd known you were coming, we would have prepared a proper welcome." "No need for ceremony, Mayor. I'm here on personal business." James turned back to Elena. "May we come in? We have some things to discuss." Elena nodded mutely and led the small group into her garage. Diane closed the door behind them, cutting off the curious stares of the townspeople. Inside, James looked around with interest, noting the old tools hanging on the walls, the faded photographs, the worn but spotlessly clean workbenches. "You keep this place in excellent condition," he observed. "Thanks," Elena replied, still trying to process the situation. "So, the helicopter, that was the something you wanted to show me?" James laughed. "No, that was just transportation. This is what I wanted to show you." He nodded to one of the men, who unrolled a large blueprint on her workbench. Elena leaned forward. It was a detailed architectural drawing of what appeared to be a state-of-the-art research facility. As she studied it, she realized with a shock that the central building incorporated the existing structure of her garage. "What is this?" she asked, her finger tracing the familiar outline of her father's shop within the larger complex. "The future," James said simply. "If you accept my offer, this will be the Reyes Innovation Center, a division of Harrington Industries dedicated to developing the next generation of engine technology." Elena's eyes widened as she took in the details. Labs, testing areas, workshop, spaces all built around her garage, which remained intact at the heart of it all. "You'd keep the original building?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Of course. It's where the magic happens, isn't it? James smiled. Your father built something special here. I don't want to replace it. I want to build on it. Literally and figuratively. The second man unrolled another blueprint, this one showing the interior of her garage, updated with new equipment but retaining its essential character. Her father's workbench remained exactly where it had always been, though now surrounded by technology that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Why? Elena finally asked, looking up at James. Why me? Why this place? You could build a facility like this anywhere. Hire anyone. James considered her question seriously. Do you know what the biggest problem in technological innovation is today, Elena? She shook her head. Disconnect, he said firmly. Disconnect between theory and practice, between design and application, between people who think about machines and people who actually work with them. He tapped the blueprint. I have plenty of brilliant engineers who can design on computers all day. What I need is someone who understands engines in her bones, who can bridge that gap. Elena's throat tightened. It was exactly how her father had always described his approach to engines, understanding them in his bones. The salary would be substantial, Diane interjected, handing Elena a folder. Along with equity in the company and full creative control over your projects. Elena opened the folder and nearly dropped it when she saw the number on the contract. Inside, it was more money than she'd ever imagined, more than enough to pay off all her debts and secure her future for good. This can't be real, she whispered. It's very real, James assured her. But there's something else you should know. His expression grew more serious. If you accept, your life will change, not just financially, but completely. There will be media attention, corporate responsibilities, travel. Elena looked around her small garage, the only home she'd really known. And if I say no? James shrugged. Then I shake your hand, wish you well, and get back in my helicopter. No hard feelings. The offer is genuine, but so is your choice. The garage fell silent. Outside, Elena could hear the murmur of the crowd, which had likely grown even larger. Her gaze fell on a photo of her father on the wall, standing proudly in front of the garage on its opening day 30 years ago. Can I have some time to think about it? She asked finally. Of course, James began, but was interrupted by a commotion outside. The door burst open and Tom Walker rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. Elena, you've got to come see this. The whole town is out there and there are news vans pulling up. Elena followed Tom outside and stopped short at the AI scene before her. It seemed like all of Pine Creek had gathered in the street. News crews from the local stations were setting up cameras and people were pointing and talking excitedly. Mayor Wilson was giving an impromptu interview, gesturing grandly toward her garage. What is happening? Elena asked, overwhelmed. James appeared at her side. News travels fast, especially when it involves a potential major investment in a small town. He nodded toward a group of serious-looking men and women in business attire who were examining the empty lot. Those are representatives from the State Economic Development Office. They've been trying to get me to build a facility in this state for years. This is insane, Elena muttered, watching as Mrs. Rodriguez was interviewed by a reporter, the elderly woman beaming with pride as she told them, I always knew our Elena was special. It's a lot to take in, James acknowledged. But sometimes, opportunity doesn't knock politely. It lands in a helicopter. Elena couldn't help but laugh at that, the tension breaking slightly. Can I really do this? Run a research facility? Lead a team of engineers? I believe you can, James said quietly. But more importantly, you need to believe it. Elena looked back at her garage, then at the helicopter, symbols of her past and a possible future. The decision seemed impossible, too big to make in the bright glare of public attention. As if reading her thoughts, James nodded to Diane, who stepped forward. Mr. Harrington has meetings in the Capitol this afternoon. We need to leave soon, but we can return tomorrow for your answer. Relief washed over Elena. Tomorrow? Yes, I'll have an answer for you tomorrow. James extended his hand. Until tomorrow. Then? As Elena watched the helicopter lift off a few minutes later, carrying James and his team away, she felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind her was everything familiar and safe. Ahead was a future too bright and uncertain to fully comprehend. The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered, casting curious glances her way. Mayor Wilson approached, practically bouncing with excitement. "Elena, do you have any idea what this could mean for our town? Jobs, growth, putting Pine Creek on the map?" Elena nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. It would be something, wouldn't it? As the day wore on and Elena returned to her regular work, fixing carburetors and changing oil as she had done 1,000 times before, one thought kept circling in her mind. It wasn't about money or opportunity or even saving her father's garage. It was something James had said. "I don't want to replace it. I want to build on it." Maybe, just maybe, that was what her father would have wanted too. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Elena. After the helicopter left, customers flowed into the garage in a steady stream, though most seemed more interested in gossip than car repairs. Everyone had questions about James Harrington and his plans, questions Elena couldn't answer because she herself was still trying to make sense of it all. By closing time, her head was pounding. She flipped the sign to closed and sank into her father's old chair, rubbing her temples. The quiet of the empty garage was a blessed relief after the chaos of the day. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from friends and neighbors, all wanting to know what was happening. She hadn't replied to any of them. What could she say? That a billionaire had offered her a dream job out of nowhere? That her whole life might change overnight? It sounded crazy even to her. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Through the glass, she could see Mrs. Rodriguez standing outside, holding something wrapped in foil. Elena opened the door with a tired smile. "Hi, Mrs. R. You look exhausted, dear," the older woman said, pressing the foil package into Elena's hands. "I brought you some of my tamales, the special ones with the green chili." "You didn't have to do that," Elena protested, though the warm, spicy smell made her stomach growl. She hadn't eaten all day. "Nonsense, you need to keep up your strength." Mrs. Rodriguez peered at her with kind eyes. "Everyone's talking about what happened this morning." Elena sighed. "I bet they are. They're saying you're going to be rich and famous, that you'll leave Pine Creek behind." There was no judgment in her voice, just a gentle curiosity. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Elena admitted, leaning against the doorframe. "It's all happening so fast." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded wisely. "Big decisions shouldn't be rushed, but they shouldn't be feared either." She patted Elena's arm. "Your father would be proud, whatever you choose." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Elena locked up and retreated to her apartment with the tamales. She ate them standing by the window, watching as the streetlights came on, one by one. In the distance, she could see the empty lot where the helicopter had landed that morning. Already it seemed like a dream. Her phone rang, startling her. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Elena, it's Diane Chen." The crisp, professional voice was unmistakable. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, it's fine." Elena set down her plate. "Is everything okay?" "Yes." "Mr. Harrington asked me to check in with you, to see if you had any questions about the offer." There was a pause. "He also wanted me to tell you something that wasn't mentioned this morning." Elena's heart skipped. "What's that?" "The project has a personal connection for him. His grandfather was a mechanic too, a self-taught engineer who never had the opportunity to develop his ideas. Mr. Harrington believes there are brilliant minds working in small garages all over the country, people who understand machines in ways that university-educated engineers sometimes don't." Something warm unfurled in Elena's chest. "I didn't know that. He doesn't talk about it much," Diane said. "But I thought it might help you understand why this matters to him." After they hung up, Elena pulled out the contract again, reading through the details more carefully. The numbers were still staggering, but now she noticed other things. The creative control she would have, the provision that the original garage would remain intact, the commitment to hire locally for many of the new positions. She traced her finger over her father's name on the deed to the garage, which was included in the paperwork. Could she really do this? Transform his modest repair shop into something bigger, something that might change the future of engines themselves? Sleep came eventually, but it was restless and filled with dreams of helicopters and engines that could fly. Morning dawned clear and bright. Elena rose early, made coffee, and got dressed in her usual work clothes. Whatever she decided, she still had cars to fix today. As she headed downstairs to open the garage, she noticed something unusual: a line of people waiting outside. For a moment, she thought they were customers, but as she got closer, she realized they were holding notepads and cameras. Reporters. "There she is!" someone called as Elena approached. Immediately, they surged forward, questions flying. "Ms. Reyes, is it true that James Harrington is building a research facility here? Will you be working for Harrington Industries? How did you meet Mr. Harrington?" Elena raised her hands, overwhelmed. "Please, I'm just trying to open my shop." From across the street, Mr. Rivera emerged from his grocery store and hurried over. "Leave her alone," he scolded the reporters. "This is a place of business." He took Elena's arm and helped her through the crowd to her door. "Thank you," Elena said gratefully as they reached the safety of the garage. Mr. Rivera nodded, his kind face concerned. "They've been arriving since dawn. Television people, too." He glanced back at the crowd. "Whatever's happening, Elena, just remember, this town has your back." The words stayed with Elena as she began her workday, trying to focus on the familiar tasks of fixing engines while ignoring the occasional face that peered through her window. This was her life. Honest work with her hands, helping people keep their cars running. Could she really trade it for boardrooms and blueprints? Around noon, just as Elena was finishing up a brake job, she heard the now familiar sound of helicopter blades. Her heart jumped to her throat as she stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the sun. The crowd of reporters, which had thinned throughout the morning, suddenly swelled again, cameras pointing skyward. The black helicopter descended gracefully onto the empty lot, kicking up dust and sending the onlookers scrambling backward. When the dust settled, James Harrington emerged, looking refreshed and confident in a casual button-down shirt and khaki pants. Diane followed, tablet in hand, as always. This time there was a third person, an older man with silver hair and weather-beaten features who looked strangely out of place next to the polished executives. James spotted Elena and walked over, the older man keeping pace beside him. "Elena," James greeted her with a warm smile. "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Frank Daniels, my grandfather." The older man extended a calloused hand, which Elena shook automatically, her surprise evident. Up close, she could see the family resemblance, the same sharp blue eyes, the same direct gaze. "Pleased to meet you, young lady," Frank said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Jimmy tells me you're quite the mechanic." Elena couldn't help but smile at hearing the billionaire CEO referred to as Jimmy. "I do my best," she replied. He insisted, "On coming along today?" James explained, a hint of fond exasperation in his voice. "Wanted to see your garage for himself." Frank was already moving past them, heading into the garage with the assured stride of someone who had spent a lifetime in such places. "Hope you don't mind me looking around," he called over his shoulder. Elena and James followed him inside, leaving Diane to deal with the reporters outside. Frank moved from workbench to tool chest with obvious appreciation, occasionally picking up a tool and testing its weight in his hand. "Your father taught you?" he asked, examining a hand-forged wrench mounted on the wall. "Everything I know," Elena confirmed. Frank nodded approvingly. "You can tell a lot about a mechanic by their tools. These have been used but cared for." He turned to face her fully. "Jimmy says he's offered you a job." "He has." Elena glanced at James, who was watching their interaction with interest. "It's a big decision." "Sure is," Frank agreed. "I had an offer like that once back in '78. Engine manufacturer wanted me to come work for them, develop some ideas I had for improving fuel efficiency." He ran a hand along the edge of a workbench. "I turned them down. Didn't want to leave my shop, my customers." "Do you regret it?" Elena asked quietly. Frank considered the question, then shook his head. Made a good life for myself and my family, but those ideas? Never did get to see them come to life. He looked at his grandson with unmistakable pride. Lucky for me, Jimmy. Here inherited the mechanical touch, and the business sense I never had. James stepped forward. What my grandfather is trying to say, in his roundabout way, is that talent without opportunity can go to waste. But I think there's a third option, one where you don't have to choose between your roots and your future. He pulled out his phone and showed Elena a video, a virtual tour of the proposed Reyes Innovation Center. As the camera moved through the digital space, Elena could see how the new facility wrapped around her father's garage, preserving it while expanding on it. The original shop remained the heart of the complex, connected to modern labs and testing areas, but still intact, still recognizable. Your father's legacy doesn't have to end, James said softly. It can grow. Frank cleared his throat. I'll be outside, giving you two some space to talk. He patted Elena's shoulder as he passed. Whatever you decide, young lady, make sure it's what you want, not what everyone else thinks you should want. After Frank left, Elena and James stood in silence for a moment. Through the window, Elena could see the reporters clustering around Frank, who was gesturing animatedly, clearly enjoying the attention. He never had his chance, James said, following her gaze. By the time I was in a position to help him develop his ideas, his health was too poor for him to do the work. He turned to Elena. I don't want that to happen to you. Elena moved to her father's old desk, running her fingers over the worn wood. If I say yes, what happens to my customers? The people who count on me to fix their cars? That's entirely up to you. The Innovation Center would be your primary responsibility, but the garage could remain operational, maybe with a few employees to handle the day-to-day repairs while you focus on development. James watched her carefully. You could have both worlds. Elena looked around the garage one more time, at the faded photos, the worn tools, the memories etched into every surface. Then she looked at James, standing there with his offer of a future she'd never dared to imagine. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I'll do it. James's face broke into a genuine smile. You won't regret this, Elena. I have conditions, she added quickly. The garage stays open, we hire locally whenever possible, and I want a training program for young mechanics, especially girls who might not otherwise get the chance to learn. James nodded without hesitation. Done. All of it. He extended his hand. Welcome to Harrington Industries, Elena Reyes, as they shook hands. Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not the weight of decision, but the weight of limitation. For years, she'd been fighting just to keep her father's garage alive. Now she had the chance to make it thrive. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. Word had spread throughout Pine Creek that something big was happening at Reyes Auto Repair. As Elena stepped out of the garage with James beside her, a hush fell over the gathered reporters and townspeople. Mayor Wilson pushed to the front. Well, he demanded eagerly, is it happening? Elena looked at the faces around her, her neighbors, her customers, people who had known her all her life. Then she looked at the helicopter, symbol of a future she was only beginning to imagine. Yes, she said, her voice clear and confident. It's happening. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. Questions flew from all directions. But through it all, Elena stood tall, her decision made, her path forward suddenly, breathtakingly clear. The humble mechanic was about to change the world, one engine at a time. 6 months passed in what felt like both the blink of an eye and a lifetime too. Elena. The seasons changed. Summer fading into fall, fall giving way to winter, and now the first hints of spring were appearing in the trees around Pine Creek. But the most dramatic transformation had nothing to do with nature. Where once there had been an empty lot next to her father's garage, there now stood the gleaming Reyes Innovation Center. The construction had moved at an astonishing pace, with crews working around the clock to bring the blueprints to life. Through it all, Elena's original garage remained, untouched, protected from the dust and noise by carefully erected barriers. Today was opening day. In just a few hours, reporters from across the country would arrive, along with state officials, Harrington Industries executives, and curious locals. But for now, in the quiet early morning, Elena had the place to herself. She walked slowly through the original garage, her fingers trailing over the familiar workbench where her father had taught her to rebuild a carburetor when she was just 10 years old. Everything was exactly as it had always been, down to the faded calendar on the wall and the coffee-stained mug her father had used every morning of his working life. The only difference was the gleaming glass door at the back, which now connected this space to the state-of-the-art facility beyond. Elena pushed through this door, still marveling at how the old and new flowed together. The architects had done an amazing job, following her insistence that the transition should feel natural, not jarring. The hallway gradually widened into a large open workspace filled with equipment that would have seemed like science fiction just months ago. "Morning, boss," called a cheerful voice. Luis, her first hire, was already at his station tinkering with a prototype engine part. At just 20, he reminded Elena of herself at that age, eager, naturally talented, and hungry to learn. He'd been working as a gas station attendant when Elena found him fixing a customer's car in the parking lot, using nothing but a pocket knife and sheer ingenuity. "You're here early," Elena observed, smiling as she joined him. Luis shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Too excited about today." He held up the part he was working on, a fuel injector they'd been redesigning for weeks. "I think I figured out why it was sticking." Elena examined his work, nodding approvingly. "Smart thinking. Let's test it before everyone arrives." As they worked together, more of Elena's team began filtering in. There was Priya, the brilliant engineer who'd left a prestigious position in Silicon Valley for the chance to work on what she called real-world innovation. There was Doug, a retired auto teacher from the local community college, who brought decades of practical experience. And there were the twins, Rosa and Miguel, just out of high school but already showing more mechanical intuition than most college graduates. They were a motley crew, pulled from garages and schools and repair shops across 3 states. None of them had the pedigree that typically came with positions at a company like Harrington Industries, but they all shared the same innate understanding of engines that had caught James's attention in Elena all those months ago. "The VIPs are scheduled to arrive at 10, Priya reminded Elena, glancing at her watch. "And the first demonstration is at 11. Elena nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Today, they would be revealing their first major innovation, an engine modification that reduced fuel consumption by nearly 30% while increasing performance. It was the culmination of months of work, countless failures, and late nights that stretched into early mornings. "Everything's ready," she assured her team. "We've tested it 100 times. 112, actually," Luis corrected with a grin. "I kept count." Elena laughed, feeling some of her tension ease. "Right. 112. By 9:30, Elena had retreated to her office to change. The new clothes still felt strange, a tailored blue suit that had been selected by a personal shopper James had insisted on providing. She'd drawn the line at high heels, though, opting instead for polished but practical boots. A knock on her door made her turn. Diane stood there, as immaculate as ever in a sleek pantsuit, tablet in hand. "They're starting to arrive," she informed. "Elena, Mr. Harrington is already here. He'd like a moment with you before the crowds descend." Elena followed Diane through a private corridor that connected to a small meeting room. James was waiting, looking out the window at the gathering crowd. He turned as she entered, his face lighting up with a warm smile. "There she is," he said, crossing the room to greet her. "The woman of the hour." "Hardly," Elena replied, though she couldn't help smiling back. Over the past 6 months, she'd come to genuinely like James. Behind the billionaire facade was a person who cared deeply about innovation and the people who made it possible. "Nervous?" he asked, studying her face. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if it doesn't work?" What if everyone realizes I'm just a small-town mechanic playing pretend? James shook his head firmly. That's not what you are, and you know it. You're an innovator, Elena. Always have been. The only difference is now you have the resources to match your talent. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I brought you something. A good luck charm of sorts. Elena opened the box to find an old, worn wrench small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. It was my grandfather's, James explained. His first tool given to him by his father. He wanted you to have it. Elena's throat tightened with emotion. I can't take this. It belongs in your family, Frank insisted. Said it should go to someone who'd use it, not just display it in a case. James smiled. Besides, we're all family now, in a way. Harrington Industries is as much your creation as mine at this point. The sound of voices and movement in the main building grew louder. Their moment of quiet was ending. Ready to change the world? James asked, offering his arm in a playfully formal gesture. Elena slipped the wrench into her pocket, drawing strength from its solid weight. As I'll ever be. The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions, speeches, and demonstrations. Elena, who had always preferred to let her work speak for itself, found herself the center of attention, shaking hands with the governor, explaining their innovations to reporters, accepting congratulations from industry leaders who had flown in specifically for the event. Through it all, she caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. Mrs. Rodriguez dabbing proud tears from her eyes. Mr. Rivera taking photos with his phone. Tom from the bakery handing out free pastries emblazoned with the new Reyes Innovation Center logo. The whole town had turned out to witness her moment, but the true test came at 11 o'clock when it was time for the main demonstration. Elena stood on a small stage, a prototype engine before her, and hundreds of eyes watching expectantly. This looks like an ordinary car engine, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. The kind you'd find in millions of vehicles across the country, but we've made a few changes. As she explained the modifications, simple in concept but revolutionary in execution, she felt herself relax into the familiar territory of engines and how they worked. This wasn't so different from explaining a repair to a customer, just on a larger scale. When she fired up the engine, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause as the performance metrics appeared on the large screen behind her. The numbers didn't lie. Their innovation worked and worked beautifully. James joined her on stage, beaming with pride. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just the beginning. With Elena Reyes leading our team, Harrington Industries is entering a new era of practical innovation. The rest of the day continued at the same hectic pace, but Elena hardly noticed the time passing. She was in her element, discussing ideas, answering questions, showing off the work her team had accomplished. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the crowds began to thin, that she finally had a moment to herself. She slipped away from the main building and returned to her father's garage. The space was quiet, untouched by the excitement of the day. Elena sank into her father's old chair, feeling the familiar creak of its worn springs. We did it, Dad, she whispered, looking at his photo on the wall. Can you believe it? A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Luis stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. Sorry, boss. Didn't mean to disturb you, but there's someone here to see you. Says she won't leave until she talks to you personally. Curious, Elena followed Luis back to the main entrance. An elderly woman stood there, clutching an old pickup truck key in her gnarled hand. It took Elena a moment to recognize her as Mrs. Peterson from the next town over. Mrs. Peterson? Elena approached with a smile. What brings you here today? My truck won't start, the old woman stated matter-of-factly. Been making a funny noise for weeks. The boys at the station in town said they couldn't fix it, but I remembered how you helped my sister's car last year. Heard you'd gotten fancy with some big company now, but I figured it was worth a try. Elena glanced around at the high-tech facility, the lingering reporters, the sleek corporate logos. Then she looked back at Mrs. Peterson and her simple request. Let me get my tools, she said, her decision immediate and certain. As Elena followed, Mrs. Peterson out to the parking lot where the old pickup sat, James fell into step beside her. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyeing the elderly woman curiously. "Just fine," Elena assured him. "Mrs. Peterson needs help with her truck." James raised an eyebrow. "We have people who can handle that for you now. You don't have to do every repair yourself anymore." Elena smiled, patting the wrench in her pocket. "Some things shouldn't change, James. This garage was built on helping people, one car at a time. That's not going to stop just because we're also changing the world." Understanding dawned on his face, followed by respect. "Of course, carry on, Ms. Reyes." As Elena popped the hood of Mrs. Peterson's ancient truck, she felt a perfect sense of rightness settle over her. The gleaming innovation center rose behind her, full of possibilities and future discoveries. But here, with grease on her hands, and a problem to solve, was where it all began, and where a part of her would always belong. The humble mechanic had indeed become something more. An innovator, a leader, a bridge between worlds. But she had done it without losing sight of who she was and where she came from. As the sun began to set over Pine Creek, casting long shadows across the new building with its shining windows and the old garage with its weathered sign, Elena Reyes stood exactly where she was meant to be, at the intersection of past and future, of tradition and innovation, of dreams fulfilled and dreams yet to come. And it all began because a humble woman fixed an engine for a millionaire.